Hello guys, and you're welcome. So in this tutorial, we're going to first do a presentation on the Godot engine and the signal system, and then we'll look at some key terms or terminologies we need to understand when you're working with signals, and then finally we would actually work with signals, which will build this program and see how we can wire up and hook up signals. So as an example, this is what we're going to be building. We can actually see our player moving and collecting these coins, and I want you to look at the output. Each time the player collides with a coin, you have an input message here, and then the player finally disappears when the player's health is zero. So there's a lot going on here. We have a button, we click that button, it says button was pressed, and all this is majorly done using signals. So let's go ahead and open up the slide I have prepared for this, because using signals is sort of a advanced topic. It doesn't have to be difficult, but sometimes it's difficult because there are a lot of other concepts you need to understand before you can comfortably use signals. So this is an introduction to signals in Godot. Now there are some terminologies that you need to understand, especially the node, built-ins, variant, the callable, and the signal. So let's begin with what a node is. Now, a node represents an object, and basically Godot understands nodes as a composition of separate objects. When you gather objects together to create a hierarchy, that is what an object is. So it has a parent and a child relationship. So I'll just jump out of the presentation and just quickly take a look at Godot and give you an example. So this is our main scene on its own. And then in this main scene, I have sub scenes like the coin, the enemy, the player, and then I have this empty node here called the script runner. And basically what's happening here is that this our main scene, we've instantiated child scenes. So this is our player right here. He's all alone in his own scene, but we have a main scene where we've brought in our player as a child of the main scene. And you can actually see this arrow that represents that. So we have these duplicate coins and we duplicated these enemies. So basically this is what a node is. There are different kinds of nodes. If we look at the inspector, we have that node 2D. So basically a node, you can use a node to group other nodes and arrange them in a parent-child hierarchical structure. So that's what a node is. So let's go back to our presentation and I'll just hit this and keep going. So there are some keywords that you can hear when you're using Godot, like built-ins. So just like in other programming languages, a built-in is a data type that has come with the engine. If you install Godot, it comes in with a lot of built-in data types. There are custom variable types, and the most common and important data type in Godot is the variant. So a variant is a data type that can store or reference multiple data types. So for example, if you have an integer, you can have an integer become a float or a string or a vector too. And basically Godot itself, the entire engine, was using the variant data type, and it wraps that and it keeps everything as a variant. But each time you create your own variables, you can create an int and use it, but understand that Godot sees them as variants. So another example I like to give to you is what a callable is. And callables are a built-in variant that represent or stand in place for a function, and mostly you use callables with signals. So I'll just escape my presentation and go back here to the main game and click on this script. And I want you to notice this point right here where it says callable. Now, callable represents a function. It stands in for a function. So each time you have a callable, you're expected to pass in a function. I have a function here called greeting, and I'm using a callable to call the function. Notice this is the string name that represents this function. And basically, that's what you can look at a callable as. And a callable, like I mentioned, represents a function, and we can pass in a signal. So we can connect a signal. This is the signal name we've created here. Don't worry, we'll get into the signal. So this is our signal, first signal, and then we are connecting this signal, and then we're passing in a callable. And that's how you work with signals. You need to pass in a callable. So let's go ahead and continue. I think we're right here. So a signal in Godot is a variant type that represents data called from an object instance. And basically, it simply means a signal is a way that nodes can communicate to each other by sending out messages. And to use a signal, you have to connect a signal to an object that basically wants to listen to it or subscribe to it. So basically, if you think about this, signals are a way for nodes to communicate to each other by sending out messages. So let's actually go into Godot and look at this basic example of a signal. So we created this signal with the keyword signal and we gave it a name called first signal. And when this code is ready, we're calling the ready function. We're saying we want to connect our first signal and we want to call a function called greeting. So basically this script here is subscribing to the signal called first signal, and each time we call that signal, we're going to emit this signal. That's what this emitter means. At the same time, right here, we have a function called emitter, and what we're basically doing is emitting this signal. So if you look at it, we've created a signal. We've connected the signal to a function via a callable, and we have a function called emitter, and we're emitting the signal. And what this signal is going to do is to call this function greeting. And if we look at our function called greeting, it just says aloha. So if we run this scene, let me just quickly run this, and you look at the bottom here, you can see we have a message called aloha, and there's another signal called signal from script runner scene is running. So basically that's what a signal does. It looks confusing, but trust me, after you use it once or twice, it will all begin to make sense. And like I said, to use a signal, we have to connect those signals using the connect function. And then we can pass in the signal we want to connect and then pass in the function we want to call using a callable. So basically, like we actually explained here, callables are mostly used for signal callbacks. So if you want to call a signal, you use a callable to call that signal. And let's go ahead and see this example. So let's say we want to, let me just go back here. We want to destroy a player object if it collides with an enemy object. So how do we do this? So we're going to create a signal called player touched enemy signal. And whenever the player touches the enemy, what's going to happen is that the enemy is going to send a signal where the player is going to be destroyed, and we're going to remove a score point from the player. And this is going to be a function like we saw in this example, where it's going to do something like destroy the enemy, right? So basically that's how this works. That's how that works. And don't worry, we're going to actually see everything in this project, so it's not going to get confusing. So like I said, signals can be confusing because they seem to work like magic, and it's because you can call a signal from virtually anywhere in your project. If we look at our Godot hierarchy right here, we can have a signal basically on any of these objects, and these signals can be called any point in time whenever any game event happens. One way to identify that an object has a signal, we can actually see this Wi-Fi symbol here. That means this object has a signal attached to it. So that's a good way of recognizing and identifying that actually. And basically, once your program gets larger, you can have thousands of signals, and it's good to keep things slightly organized when you have that information about signals. And also, signals are Godot's implementation of the observer game design pattern. So yeah, so from here on, we're going to look at the practical example of how we can use and create signals. Thank you very much for watching.